Game preservation is a cause that is dear to my heart, as I'm somebody who is all about consumer advocacy. I've been that way for the last decade or so on this channel, but also I do collect a lot of these older games from the PlayStation 2 era that are now considered classic experiences, and ultimately, though, a lot of those games from that generation and beforehand, of course, are being wiped out and preservation is not happening. This is a report that came about a year, or well, actually now 2 years ago, and it was that almost 87% of retro games are being lost to time. And yes, that now includes the PlayStation 2 era, because we're older now, people. The big thing about game preservation, and one of the big obstacles in the way, is organizations like the Entertainment Software Association. This is pretty much a company that just represents the interest on a legal basis of all of the AAA games industry. Microsoft and the companies under them, Disney, PlayStation, Roblox, Riot, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers, Wizards, 2K, and Rockstar under Take-Two Interactive, Tencent, Nintendo, Epic, Bandai Namco, EA. They have been a thorn in the side of progress on a number of issues over the last couple of years. And ESA, ultimately, on the subject of game preservation, have not exactly shown their happiness about this subject. This is a report that came just last year. The ESA says members won't support any plan for libraries to preserve games online. So the ESA has said that they are in favor of game preservation, but again, just on a number of other subjects, they've shown that what their members' interests are really at heart. And the fact is, they care about making money. And that is going to get in the way of all of these movements, and that's why there is going to be legal challenges, because lobbyism is what they are known for. And sometimes it does make sense when you have politicians going after video games for being too violent, or when apparently too many people are posting Pepe the Frog memes and US senators use that as evidence of an extremism problem on a platform like Steam. And yeah, that was a real ordeal in which they're demanding Valve to take action, or they're threatening to intervene themselves. And that's why having an organization like the ESA is an important thing, but like Right to Repair is a great example. Other YouTubers like Louis Ruman has talked about this. I believe that's his channel name. But yeah, the video game industry has made themselves into clowns on the subject, but they have also shown that they don't have to show up to any of these conferences or any of these town halls and actually make a competent case. All they have to do is slide the right amount of money onto the table.
It's not just politicians, the industry lobbyists that are lobbying on behalf of the video game developers against stuff like this don't understand anything.
Of the game console to protect their safeguards against sophisticated theft or piracy, to help the piracy video game software.
The piracy video game software?
Security features that are built into them, and they're known as technical protection measures or digital locks. These locks prevent the play of any unauthorized game. Put simply, if a video game console's firmware runs a verification check on a game and it is not a legitimate copy, the video game won't play the console.
Right to Repair mandates present unique security and piracy risks to the video game ecosystem. This is one reason why the gaming industry is against Right to Repair, but ultimately it takes money from console makers and various other figures in this industry that are making hardware. Of course, the video game industry would be against an effort like this, but in the past, I've talked extensively, this was a major part of my channel in the early days, but it was the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box debacle, which ultimately led to many organizations around the world, or governments I should say, looking into legal action to making some sort of rule against loot boxes moving forward. We've obviously seen movement in Europe from countries like Belgium and Netherlands that actually did outlaw it, at least on some level. But in other countries, we have seen that legal action happen, but it went absolutely nowhere. And again, that is because of this organization right here, the ESA. They fought tooth and nail to stop it. And say what you will about it and your opinion on it, but yes, loot boxes on every single study that has come out has linked it to problem gambling and saying that it is psychologically akin to gambling. This is science that the video game industry rejects because there is money to be made. And this was one of the examples of the legal efforts, at least in the United States, that took off, and it was a state representative from Hawaii, and they tried making a loot box law, and again, the ESA came out and they defeated it. And the ESA and other companies under the ESA, like Electronic Arts, they showed up to these town halls or these meetings with lawmakers, and they said mumbo jumbo pretty much. They compared loot boxes to surprise mechanics, to Kinder Eggs. I think at another ESA meeting, the ESA went to one of these political town halls, and they said that no, it's like like baseball cards, trading them. All of that makes no sense, and the science does not back it up, but that's all that needed to be said, and all of this was ultimately defeated. Fortunately, a lot of AAA publishers have backed up on this, but loot boxes still are prevalent in the mobile industry, and it has creeped a little bit more back into console and AAA games, and it really went nowhere with sports franchises. But still, this is a massive subject that is relevant to what is going to be happening with the game preservation case of Stop Killing Games, because the ESA is about to fight tooth and nail to stop it. And I do think that it is important for a movement like Stop Killing Games to be taking off, especially at a time when you have this. This was just announced today, and this is why I'm going to have Anthem gameplay in the background. It is the fact that Electronic Arts announced that just after 7 years, Anthem servers are going offline, and this game will no longer be functional. For those who have played Anthem, it is a messy experience. I did not personally like it myself, but there are parts of the game that have potential. The Iron Man flying mechanics are really fun, and it's one of those games that I would love to be able to boot up years from now and be like, hey, this is a game that I didn't really like back in the day, but the potential was there, and I just like the idea of being able to boot it up, especially for a game that I spent my hard-earned money on. But Electronic Arts is taking that away because we don't own our games, especially these online games like this. We own a license, something that has not been necessarily translated all that well by the video game industry to players for good reason, because they don't want people to know that. Because if they did, that may make them a little bit hesitant to, pass out cash and try a game like this, especially when it did release. But yes, they are shutting it down on January 12th, 2026, and there is a single-player component here. And unfortunately, BioWare and Electronic Arts, they never made like an offline-only component to this, so this game is completely dead. And even in their frequently asked questions section here on their website, they said that, on January 12th, the game will no longer be playable. Why can't I play Anthem in offline mode? Because they never made an offline mode. They should have, but they didn't. Anthem was designed to be an online-only title, so once the servers go offline, the game will no longer be playable. This question right here is the real reason why Stop Killing Games is taking off, because in the eyes of a lot of gamers, this is unacceptable, and this should not be the status quo moving forward. And they give massive props to Ross of Accursed Farms for taking this movement and making it what it was. And it really started with The Crew a couple years ago. And if you're unfamiliar, Ubisoft was widely criticized for shutting down the Crew's servers a couple years ago. Since the original game requires an online connection and Ubisoft hasn't released an offline patch, the Crew is completely unplayable. So to make matters worse, Ubisoft deleted the game from players' libraries, preventing the original game from being downloaded or booted up. And this article rightfully points out that Ubisoft is clearly trying to force players to abandon the original game and move on to the Crew 2 or the Crew Motorfest. That's the status quo of all these companies. That's the reason why they're taking these games offline. Obviously, it's probably due to low activity, but there's definitely a financial incentive to make sure that players move from that to their new product, or wait for a remaster in the future, or a remake, or a sequel, or something. And that is something that for the AAA games industry is going to fight. The ESA will take that fight on. And that's definitely something that gets me a little concerned about this movement once it finally gets into the legal courts, and once you actually start having politicians having to have a say in this conversation. Because I've seen how this blows up and goes in a completely different direction than intended and ends up just with zero progress at all. So that's why, massive amounts of outrage and people talking about the subject is very much important, because the loot box topic, it ended up dying out as the months and years went by. This one, I hope it is different. And this was a step too far at the time for the Crew, and that's actually what originally really sparked this Stop Killing Games campaign from Ross. And with the Crew effectively wiped from existence, fans who originally bought the game can no longer access a game they paid for, even if they own the disc. That sets a worrying precedent for the future of game preservation. Don't buy this game as you don't actually own it. And players at the time did react accordingly by review bombing on Steam the Crew Motorfest and the Crew 2. And it does need to be said that Ubisoft was sued. They were sued for taking the Crew offline by players who own the game, saying that they duped players. The plaintiffs alleged that terminating the Crew means Ubisoft violated California law and that it intentionally misled players about the game being playable offline. Ubisoft reacted accordingly by saying that you cannot complain it shut down the Crew because you never actually owned it. And that really does get to the crux of this problem, the fact that game ownership versus license ownership. And Ubisoft is pretty much just arguing that you weren't deceived by the lack of an offline version to access a decade discontinued video game. The Crew players receive the benefit of their bargain and cannot complain now that they were deceived. Ubisoft, that's what they've argued in the courts of of law. And for what it's worth, there was another game that I just love this. Imagine just loading up a game like Dark and Darker. You're like, well, I wonder what today's coming on. And then you find out immediately, oh yeah, Epic Games had to remove Dark and Darker from sale on the Epic Games Store because of a court ruling that nobody, I guess, knew about at the time in Korea between the publisher. And yeah, on November 1st, we'll be removing the game from your library. Yeah, they're removing it from people's libraries, effective immediately. Players lose access on the game. They don't get a refund entirely on everything. And that's that. This is kind of why game preservation, the conversation, is definitely sparking up. And it isn't just like on online-only experiences. It's on the history of the gaming industry, retro games, and also rulings like this, which is absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that this is just going to be removed from people's libraries and the game's just gone for good until maybe this legal action changes or something. I will give props to Steam because I think there was some legal action that happened in California and they just got ahead of it and they finally admit to people, the game that you're buying is really just a license. This is a massive step in people understanding that the digital age, we really do not own anything, at least in the physical age with, game discs and copies, and this is more relevant just to single player entries, but you had an ownership. You could load up that game and you can still do that to this day if you own a console. That is not going to be something that can be guaranteed in the future, especially with the explosion in online-only titles. So all of these notable incidents, especially the crew, brought upon Stop Killing Games, and as it says on its own website, it's a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games that have been sold to consumers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to customers, but making preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. And this movement has been launching legal action in a number of territories. We've seen it in the UK, we've seen it in the EU, and there's been some past efforts in other territories as well. And it is finally starting to take off now after Ross of Cursed Farms made a video, a last plea, because yes, the countdown is quickly approaching. I believe it is the end of this month in which the EU petition, which is the big one, is ending. And hopefully this will be in lawmakers' hands and we'll see what happens once it finally gets to that step. But this petition for the longest time hadn't really amounted to too many signatures. It had a couple of 100,000, and Ross of Accursed Farms put the blame specifically at the hands of the person that really muddied the waters with this entire situation and has not backed down at all. And even as of recording this video, he's made some other remarks that we're going to get into just literally tonight about Stop Killing Games and his contribution to this movement. But this guy has muddied the waters. He's been the main one that has made it out to be that this is horrifically bad and it's bad for everybody, and there's just so many different problems with this movement that could ruin the video game industry and make games unplayable, or many publishers won't even take that chance into the future.
And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player.
Like
well,
you?
I've explained that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. These are two different ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it.
But those aren't the ideologies. Nothing in the initiative is asking to convert games to single player.
And because of this, it really has given, or at least it did for a while, give people pause to supporting Stop Killing Games and what it's all about. And this thumbnail choice by Jason Thor Hall of PirateSoftware, just really crazy that this guy named his channel PirateSoftware, and he's really against so much of these measures. That's a different topic. But yeah, this is what he thinks about this movement, and he is a former Blizzard employee, which people having fun with that one in the comment section of this video specifically. You can take the employee out of the Blizzard, but you can't take the Blizzard out of the employee. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment. Yeah, that checks out. And in this first video that he was critical of the Stop Killing Games movement, he at the time just basically lied about what this movement was going for, saying that it was trying to make online-only titles into single-player titles at the end of life, and that's just unreasonable for publishers or companies to do in the future. And this is a developer mindset that he has, and people just aren't caring enough about developers. And look, I think a lot of people, a lot of consumers genuinely do not give a shit about publishers, and they also do think that having a precedent where publishers just having a functional state that's very different than, turning it into a single player title. Server binaries is enough for a lot of people, and that isn't a massive thing to ask in the future to be, because this isn't saying like games that came out in 2007 or whatever have to finally, appease to this potential new legislation that comes out. out. No, it's games that come about in the future. It sets a new precedent moving forward for the industry, and developers, publishers have to think about this type of stuff when they are developing a game. And I don't really think that's unreasonable to ask. But for Jason Hall here, a former Blizzard employee, I guess it is. And despite what people may think about Pirate Software, he does hold a lot of influence. He has a massive following on YouTube, Twitch, and his other social media pages. He also has experience in this AAA games industry that has caught the attention of a lot of viewers and a lot of the audience that look for his opinion on matters like this. And even in the comment section of this video, he was answering some of the criticisms that he was receiving months ago, such as he's not even offering solution, he's just yapping, and this is the status quo response that he gives. This is pretty much just has how things stand. He says, inform the customer at point of purchase that they will be getting a license to the game. It should never be posed as a purchase or buying the game at all because you aren't, and that's just not enough in the eyes of a lot of people, including myself. He feels, Pirate Software, that games should just expire. Game preservation, in his eyes, doesn't entirely matter. That's what this argument tells me. And then he responded to somebody else saying, it's easy to do because the frequently asked questions section said so. It's very clear that nobody involved in writing that frequently asked question actually makes games. I've had a 20-year career in the industry spanning from QA, engineering, IT, and red team. These demands are not simple problems to solve. It cannot be done easily for newer games. And what he's responding to is this section on the website, which I actually think elegantly points out deconstructs a lot of the criticism that Pirate Software specifically has said. Aren't you asking companies to support games forever? Isn't that unrealistic? No, we are not asking that at all. We are in favor of publishers ending support for a game whenever they choose. What we are asking for them is to implement an end-of-life plan to modify or patch the game so that it can run on customer systems with no further support from the company being necessary. That is a reasonable ask in the eyes of everybody, except for somebody like Pirate Software. Another question, isn't it impractical, if not impossible, to make online-only multiplayer games work without company servers? Not at all. The majority of online multiplayer games in the past functioned without any company servers and were conducted by the customers privately hosting servers. I think Star Wars Galaxies had a long reign because of stuff like this, because of players privately hosting servers. And there's a number of other examples over the years, from I think Team Fortress 2, even Titanfall 2. So just there's many examples of this working successfully and connecting to each other. Games that were designed this way are all still playable today. As to the practicality, this can vary significantly. If a company has designed a game with no thought given towards the possibility of letting users run the game without their support, then yes, this can be a challenging goal to transition to, and the hope would be that this changes moving forward. Can you really expect all features in an online-only game to work once support ends? Not necessarily. We understand some features can be impractical for an end user to attain if running a server on an end user system. That said, we also see the ability to continue playing the game in some form as a reasonable demand from companies that customers have given money to. There is a large difference between a game missing some features versus being completely unplayable in any form. And this is specifically a frequently asked question section that Jason Hall is arguing is nonsensical for anybody who has worked in the video game industry. And then he did admit that he just won't even talk to Ross of Accursed Farms. He says, correct, I think his position is disingenuous due to his comments about how this could be pushed through government. It's a bad direction, removes validity or what the initiative is trying to do, portrays the process in an incorrect manner, and just builds sensationalism. And I feel like the only person that has been disingenuous on this entire subject and is putting fingers in his ears whenever anybody points out valid criticisms to what he's saying is Jason Hall here of Pirate Software, which is a name that does not really make sense with his perspective on a subject like this, and it seems other topics over the years. He did have a follow-up video, another one which is just extremely problematic. It talks about, I'm going to call it is a silly scenario in which developer abuse could amount. He brings up a situation in which somebody who I guess wants to have a private server of said live service could use bots, exploits, and community to drive up the costs and cause this live service to fail, and then they would have to relieve the server binaries, and this other outside party could then, use those server binaries to make their own server, and they could monetize it. It's just totally absurd in my mind that this is something that it's corporate sabotage, which is already not legal, and something that obviously Stop Killing Games does not back up and does not support. And this is the argument that he's using to go after Stop Killing Games, the movement, entirely, and I just find that absolutely absurd. He also tries arguing that these these online-only titles, he's going to use Apex Legends as an example, but he says if they aren't played by the mass amount of players like they originally did, then is it really game preservation? And I just take considerable issue with that, because I think it is, especially when you can have LAN events, you can have community servers. That's still something that exists with many titles, many older titles, but specifically this is what he said.
Trying to fix something. So the next one is that this is about games preservation, and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations and for everyone to always have forever. But I would argue that this isn't actually preserving these games. Social games, such as, let's say, Apex Legends, require a number of players to be in the match at the same time so that you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interacting, right? It's a multiplayer game, you need a bunch of people. How many of you have felt negatively?
You don't need hundreds or thousands of people to make just a match of people that want to play together and experience a game that they did back in the old day. That's something that still exists with so many games over the years. There's Halo LAN events. That should be something that's, you know, acceptable in the future. And I think that's what people are fighting for, or at least one aspect of this.
When an MMO dies, or when a live service game dies. Oh, dead game. There's only 5 people online. Why would I play that? So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me. You want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense. That's not preservation.
And again, this is just his perspective, one that a lot of people disagree with, and the history of this video game industry really disagrees with him, because private and community servers have thrived in so many different instances over the years, and he's just entirely ignoring that history to, I guess, push his perspective forward. And again, there's just so many holes in this that he's just ignoring. So hopefully you get a little bit of a better understanding of Jason Hall and his perspective on this matter, and why many people, including myself, have taken issue with it, and how he indeed has muddied the waters. This is why this movement, you saw many individuals, and they still do to this day, have said, well, you know, turning online games into single player, I can't get behind that. And that's never what this movement was about. It's about turning a lot of these online titles, making sure that they're going to be in a functional state once they're over, once they're not making money for these companies, and these companies have moved on to the next product or so. And we've seen petitions like this. The European Union, it specifically says this, and Jason Hall has said that he really takes issue with this last part, or this first sentence, saying the initiative calls to require publishers that sell licensed video games to consumers in the European Union to leave said video games in a functional, playable state. He absolutely disagrees with this, but he's also a little bit biased on this, as he is a company director and somebody who has worked on live service games, and I do think that is a part of this that does need to be brought into this conversation. And like I said, other individuals have parroted this perspective of his. I understand gamers' sentiment around this initiative, but I must admit I agree with Thor on this, and I've spoken about it myself. Such an initiative would cripple games in the long term. We could see a reduction in variety, fewer releases, and some genres completely dying. What specifically would cripple games? A requirement for all games to eventually revert. This is never what anything Stop Killing Games has said, but people have parroted it. To a single-player only experience comes with massive restrictions on their development, just to name one issue. This would leave studios avoiding certain features, and then this person rightfully points out this is not what Ross has at all been advocating, or the Stop Killing Games movement, but individuals like this keep on bringing this stuff up, and that is because of PirateSoftware. Whether he means it or he doesn't, it doesn't matter. PirateSoftware has made a mess of this, and he has for a while until now, and it really needs to be said that Ross has rallied the troops, and he got a lot of people talking, and fortunately these petitions have now been taking off in recent days, and they are going to meet their goals. It's not just in the EU, it's also in the UK, in which conversation is going to meet lawmakers. We'll see what ends up happening afterwards, especially with the introduction of the ESA. I definitely question what they're going to be saying to these lawmakers and their own input, but movement is happening, and it looked like this movement was dead, but thanks to PirateSoftware, it is fortunately back again, and it is thriving. And I think it is worth highlighting the fact that May 31st, this was only at 44%. 450,000 signatures. Fast forward to today, it is standing at we'll actually refresh the page, and yeah, 1,059,000. And it is important to note that Ross of Accursed Farms, as he rightfully has pointed out, that it is important that these petitions are as accurate as possible. What does that entirely mean? It means the fact that there's going to be incorrect signatures and bad actors just filling this out, and if it isn't accurate signatures, they don't count. So what this means is that you're going to have this goal probably at 1.4 million, so more and more people are going to have to sign up, and of course I'm going to have a link in the description down below. Fortunately though, the UK poll has already met its its goal of 100,000, and Parliament will consider this for debate, as it did meet the requirement of 100,000 signatures. We'll see what happens there. Again, loot box efforts in the past, I saw how that went absolutely nowhere, and I'd be a little bit more concerned about the UK, but the EU, definitely this was the big one. This was the big one everybody was talking about, and PirateSoftware, his criticisms, his outrage, definitely, he did the impossible for Stop Killing Games. He revived this. Say what you will about him and his arguments against it. I don't know if Stop and Kill Games could have done it without him. And very much so, it cannot be understated the other massive influencers that chimed in and advocated for their audience to sign up for this EU petition. We saw the likes of PewDiePie coming out supporting the Stop Killing Games initiative. We saw Jacksepticeye, and of course Asmongold has made a number of videos telling their audiences to get in on this and help save games moving forward. And these individuals are a big part why this petition is over 1 million signatures right now and only continuing to grow. And it must be brought up that PirateSoftware has responded to this EU petition, reaching its 1 million signatures. He responded on the old Twitter or X saying, "The most interesting narrative is that my video somehow killed the initiative. The graph shows that the initiative already had a downward trend in interest when my videos dropped. My videos do not seem to have had any impact on the movement at all." And again, I showed that comment a second ago, that individual right here muddying the water. This is what he did. He muddied the waters, and he definitely got a lot of people, pausing. And when you have a massive channel like he does, he has over 2 million followers and such. He had 79,000 likes on it. A lot of individuals, and they have said this in comments on Ross's own video and other comment sections, saying that they didn't understand the movement and they thought what PirateSoftware was saying was fact, and it wasn't. And a lot of people are waking up to that fact. So PirateSoftware is just completely ignoring this logic and saying, well, look at this, I guess this graph that shows that the movement was already dying. I didn't really do anything. But yes, he says, making me the villain did though. Best of luck with your next steps, he says sarcastically. He doesn't mean that. And for those that don't understand why I put out those videos in the first place, you might want to give this a read. And again, I guess this is a legal perspective or something, and it seems to argue, Daniel Tan, I don't know who this is, but the Stop Killing Games movement represents the worst kind of activism, well-intentioned but legally illiterate demands that ignore existing protections while asking for impossible remedies. To be clear, game preservation is a legitimate concern. Digital works can disappear forever when servers shut down, and there's real cultural value in maintaining access to gaming history, but the fact that a problem exists doesn't justify legally impossible solutions or activism built on fundamental misunderstandings of law. And he says that Ross Scott of Accursed Farms spent a year claiming laws were undefined when they're actually comprehensive and clearly opposed to his goals. The movement asked for government regulation while ignoring the extensive regulatory framework that already exists. They demanded rights that contradict fundamental legal principles while dismissing the consumer protections already available. And I guess he's trying to argue that what we have is already enough, and I just don't view it that way at all. It's important to highlight that on the Stop Killing Games website, the frequently asked section, this question is directly answered. It says that the US, yes, it kind of has been settled, but in other countries, that's not the same story. Many existing laws are not written for a scenario where the seller destroys the product sold to the customer after the point of sale, since this is not something that normally happens in the real world. So that's why they're challenging so many different legal avenues. And even if this was established law, and I don't agree with that perspective, this is something that has to be challenged, and it does have to start somewhere. Why not that be the EU or the UK? That's where change really begins, once you have one of these territories or locations rule in favor of consumers, and hopefully other places will follow suit, and hopefully what's followed after that is further legal action from consumers fighting for further protections and game preservation. In this next paragraph, he makes the argument that PirateSoftware was saying pretty much that if SKG supporters actually cared about consumer protection, they'd be focusing on strengthening disclosure requirements. Again, the same shit that's saying that we should be satisfied with having, I guess, a note on online title websites or copies of the game saying that it is just a license, we don't actually own the game, and then it pretty much says that we should be pushing for clear expiration date requirements. And again, that is just not enough in the eyes of a lot of us. We actually do want to see game preservation. We want to see that these games continue on in some form, some capacity into the future, and I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. But on this subject matter, Pirate Software has had a lot more to say. He is receiving a lot of criticism and a lot of people going after him. And he decided, I mean, he can say that, oh, I'm being made the villain. You actively wanted to be the villain with this situation. He's ignoring that, but he very much so wanted to. And now he is crying victim on social media. He said that he is no longer working at Off-Brand Games, one of the companies that he worked with in the past. He was a director at that studio, I believe. People were attacking all of the games we were publishing and trying to mass review bomb them. You can dislike the things I say, but this kind of behavior is unhinged. Learned a lot there, accomplished a lot, hope they succeed regardless. For those trying to say this is somehow a lie, the abuse was across socials, people on Discord, Twitter, Reddit, and some reviews on Steam. Indie games are fragile things, and attacks like that hit hard. Overall sentiment was to bash the games and the developers working on them. And Ludwig, who I believe is also a part of this, chimed in saying, "Stop Killing Games is a good initiative, but a few bad actors review bombed, harassed developers of the games we support at Off-Brand Games. Appreciate Thor stepping down for the betterment of the devs and their games." And then he goes on to say, "Such a bummer. Rivals 2 is getting any crap for this. Few devs support their games as much as the Rivals of Aether team. They still patched the original Rivals game 10 years ago. People are now review bombing the game because what? Pirate Software, who has no personal stake in the game, works at Off-Brand Games, feels wrong." And other individuals have looked into this. Mischief points out, none of Off-Brand Games titles are getting review bombed. Ludwig and Pirate Software are both blatantly lying to seemingly further slander the Stop Killing Games movement. Incredibly weird and manipulative behavior from the both of them. And this is a recent review. There's 6 reviews compared to 89 in June. There's no review bombing happening here. And that seemed to be the main victim card that they were trying to go for. I don't understand it. Here's a full list of the titles they currently publish and the recent review graphs for them on Steam. I don't see a review bombing at all going on here, and it definitely does feel like another case of trying to throw shade and trying to throw the Stop Killing Games movement under the bus with no actual proof of this. Yeah, 2 reviews to 1. And as this individual, Mischief, points out, all these reviews actually talk about the games. There's nothing with SKG or whatever. And then he does point out that it is worth noting, however, that Pirate Software is self-published. That's not of Off-Brand Games. Very different than what both Pirate and Ludwig are going for, or what they're saying on Steam is being review bombed. That's different. That's different. People are going after Pirate Software specifically, not Off-Brand Games, which Ludwig and Pirate seem to be implying with these tweets. But look, Pirate Software has been saying a lot on social media that I do think many that are watching may be unfamiliar with, because he first put out this tweet about a week or so ago, and he said that, "Been reading through all the posts against me over my stance on Stop Killing Games initiative. Tons of people calling me a liar, that I misrepresented the initiative. Also lots of content creators dogpiling in this to get their pound of the flesh. Not at all looking at the substance of the arguments that we're actually making. He just thinks that this is a dogpiling, and I find that ridiculous." He says, "I also harshly critique Ross Scott's wording in his videos because they disparage the lawmaking process and lawmakers, which doesn't benefit players or this movement in any way." So we're going with the old think about the lawmaker's perspective. You're not going to get many people behind that one. Jesus. And he says, "I then explained that very few people in the game development space can actually discuss this from the other side due to fear of losing their jobs." I've seen game developers chime in on this, and they absolutely disagree with Pirate Software, and he has nothing to say with this. We'll get into this as this video goes along. "A studio is much safer in silent dissent than they are discussing the drawbacks of your ideals." Of course, the AAA games industry isn't going to get fucking behind this. Come on, Thor, come on. "The recent attacks on our games is obvious evidence of this, and there's no examples of that based on the review pages of Steam at the very least." I'm sure he's getting nasty remarks and people disagreeing, but again, I want to see proof of that, and there just isn't, at least right now. Another individual pointed out that Pirate Software actually deleted a tweet which really went after Accursed Farms of Ross, the leader again of the Stop Killing Games movement, saying, "I put out 2 videos disagreeing with your initiative 10 months ago and haven't talked about it since. Now your initiative has failed and you're blaming me for 33 minutes of an hour-long video covering it. Your community is out in for shitting up our streams and socials with hate messages, that, and snide comments. Since you're so set on cutting up our responses, blah, 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 blah." He says, "The only engagement I've seen that is level-headed has been from Louis Rossman. His video breaks down what I disliked. I'm fine talking to people that are level-headed." He already said he didn't want to talk to Ross about this and can have a conversation, but you're real, dude. Every time you've been involved, your orbiters turn shit toxic instantly, and it sets me off. Your community is effing rabid, and it's shit to deal with for anyone on the other side of the argument. Why do you think I haven't talked about this in 10 months? Why do you think we auto-mute anyone bringing it up in chat? Because it's been rage bait and shit flinging the entire time. Your own Reddit had people openly talking about causing drama in our community to try to stir it up more support. I still disagree with your movement for all the reasons I stated. That's unlikely to change, and at this point I am more than fine with that. And he deleted this tweet, but obviously people took screenshots of this, and this was his only post really going after Accursed Farms. And I know this may sound like a crazy concept to Pirate Software, but maybe take some ownership over the fact that you have a shitty perspective that is at odds with consumer protections, and indeed a lot of people, and I think a lot of people outside of Ross's circles, take issue with that. Actions have consequences, people. But Pirate and Accursed Farms did have a back and forth about a week or so ago, and again, it's a very lengthy ordeal. I'll just summarize it to this because there's a funny comment that Pirate says in a second. He says, "You took clips of me on stream out of context." He says his obsession of multiplayer games into single player. That was the main premise of that first video. I don't care if he tries distancing himself from that perspective. He very much made that, and he muddied the waters because of that. Again, look at those comments that I brought up earlier on. You specifically did not include most media from my videos regarding all of the issues I have with the initiative, as I read them for your actual ECI page. From there, you waited to post this attack piece with your initiative, had a single month left in order to cause as much shock value support as possible, but hey, I misrepresented the initiative, right? I don't think they were out of context at all, blah, 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 blah. And then Pirate says this, this gets me. If you create an environment that puts heavy restrictions or roadblocks on making online-only games, then you will get less online-only games and more single-player couch co-op games. This isn't hard to understand. He says that like it's a bad thing. I think a lot of people are okay with that. If AAA publishers and just publishers in general can't get behind these heavy restrictions of saying that games need to be functional when end of life approaches, then don't make these type of games. I think people are okay with that perspective. If you polled most people, I think 95% are a-okay with that happening. And again, Pirate Software keeps running around with this, I'm representing the perspective of game developers. Game developers have reached out to me. Well, here's a game developer actively disagreeing with his remarks on social media, and he says, this is a producer at Industry Devs, he says, "From one dev to another, you lack the intellectual octane to maneuver this space. Many games, specifically multiplayer games, solve 90% of preservation issues decades ago. We just stopped doing it so we could push customers to the yearly reskin because that was more profitable," which is what every fucking person is saying. But Pirate's ignoring. The problem has already been solved. It's strange to see a dev so lost on this. There's a few hangups with microtransactions, but that is a design problem, not a preservation problem. Full stop. Stay clear, man, please. And he responded, "If you want to build an online game in that environment, you would need to support that throughout the life cycle of development. Online-only games are made or broken based on players' demand for them. If the demand goes down, then the game dies. You don't really know when, if this will happen, but you can forecast for it and give it a best guess. This means that over the life cycle of the game, you will need to be constantly updating those releasable versions. That means developer and tester times for every version of the game. Online-only games evolve over time. It's generally the point of MMOs as an example of this." And again, he's muddying the waters, not understanding. People aren't asking for releasable versions of every single version of a game. They're talking end of life. And furthermore, other individuals responded to this tweet, this perspective, by deconstructing it as well, saying you could still, let's say, release the server software so people can host in private. Take Knockout City as an example. They released the tools needed for private servers. Somebody else saying very easy to simply release the tools you use to run the game to the public. Many MMOs have been successfully sunset this way and continue to have players to this day. And then somebody bringing up my point, which is, what do you mean those releasable versions, and in what environment? Isn't this the end product already a releasable version? And if it's so difficult, how are people making private servers of MMOs? All of these perspectives just basically ignored here by Jason. That adds cost and pressure to every release and likely more hiring requirements to fill the need. A lot of smaller teams will just dip out as a result. This isn't work you can quickly do at the end as your studio is collapsing. As a dev, you know that though, right? And he says we can limit restructuring with APIs. If you're an example of MMOs, even end-user communities have created their own APIs to facilitate when none existed. Sure, things may get deprecated and you need to update, adjust, but that's part of the business of running a service that requires maintenance. You're doing it anyway. Build it smarter from the onset and you'll be fine. Wait until everything crumbles in your toast. This is Dev 101 and starts before production. As a dev, you know that, right? Next question. They go on, but like I said, devs don't completely agree with this perspective. I don't know what Pirate keeps running around saying that he's just representing the developer perspective on this. And we've seen other back and forths. Joseph Strife Hayes went after him as well, saying one of the main reasons or issues is when you go from attacking the argument with reasoned, sourced counter arguments to attack the person with demeaning bullying insults. Even if people wanted to listen to your side and even support you, your attitude is driving people away. And he says, sure, I shouldn't have clapped back when Ross disparaged lawmakers. And he keeps on fucking bringing up lawmakers with legal problems. process. Please stop with that, please. You're not winning anybody over with this. Nobody's thinking about lawmakers at all. If anything, I'm concerned that the lobbying efforts will get to them. I called it out and harshly responded. That being said, it doesn't refute what I've said here in any way. The initiative has real issues in its goals and can serve to a lot of damage to games should those not be addressed as I have stated. And the issues that he's brought up almost sound nonsensical, and especially the examples he's brought up. Another response, somebody has pointed out that it's not alleged Pirate did actually attempt a DMCA takedown of an indie Steam game because the dev made a bait post on Reddit implying that he'd added a parody version of Pirate, shown below, into the game. Not only was his blatant abuse of DMCA to protect his bruised ego, the version of the game on Steam hadn't even been updated to include this parody, a fact that neither Pirate nor his alleged on-staff lawyer bothered to check before sending this DMCA, though.
So I filed a DMCA claim, and he has now filed a counterclaim against me. We're going to take you to court. You're going to lose. You cannot use somebody's likeness or voice in any way inside of your games without their permission.
So like I said, people have been having negative opinions about Pirate for a while now. It's not just this entire ordeal. There was also a World of Warcraft thing that happened a while ago as well, but there's incidents over the years. And with posts like this going viral, it does make clear that PirateSoftware is just enemy number one in the gaming sphere for right now. And he is largely responsible. He did the impossible. He is the reason why Stop Killing Games hit its goal of 1 million. He is also the reason why the UK one reached over 100,000 signatures. He is the reason why these petitions both are growing and will see the eyes of lawmakers, and that's huge. But also, please do not get it confused. PirateSoftware's stance against the Stop Killing Games initiative is not just misguided, it's borderline harmful. Let's not sugarcoat it. We're at a point in the games industry where consumers are finally waking up to how little control they actually have over the products they buy, and a lot of that is thanks to the death of physical media. But here comes PirateSoftware, telling us to sit down, stop complaining, and be more understanding towards the studios erasing entire games from existence. It's a weak, tone-deaf take that misses the bigger picture completely. The goal of Stop Killing Games isn't to hurt small devs, it's to push back against corporate publishers who treat software like temporary subscriptions while pretending it's a product. And very much so, the only companies that should be concerned about this entire ordeal are the ones that have anti-consumer as their business model, and there are many of them, especially in the AAA sphere. But if anything, indie devs should be supporting this effort, because the more consumers get burned by digital-only AAA titles, the more they'll seek out smaller DRM-free alternatives. The tide can shift in their favor if they're on the right side of the issue. Instead, though, PirateSoftware is publicly downplaying the movement, acting like it's some hyperbolic, entitled rant from clueless players. That's rich, coming from a developer who constantly appeals to players as a community while simultaneously defending an industry model that erases their work, their time, and their money. If the industry ever reaches a point where all games are streamed server-dependent and controlled by license-only contracts, the people who helped normalize that even passively will be partially responsible. And ultimately, I think PirateSoftware, that's what he's okay with. And people are allowed to demand ownership of the things they buy. People are allowed to be angry when something they paid for is taken away, and developers should not be telling them to shut up and accept it. The Stop Killing Games initiative, and we really need to put an emphasis on that initiative part, because all this is not set in stone, the terminology, the words and everything, it is not perfect, but it is a necessary fight for what its end goal is. It's about preserving the integrity of this medium before it becomes disposable junk like every other over-monetized service model, and PirateSoftware is on the wrong side of that fight. Anyway, what is your opinion on the Stop Killing Games movement initiative, as well as your thoughts on PirateSoftware's criticisms of this movement? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.